So you just purchased a KickAss car awning and now you're trying to install it. Well, it's a pretty straightforward process and we're going to walk you through that. There's a couple things you need to look at. First, you've got your brackets and you've got your hardware. In addition to that, you're going to have a wrench, but I recommend, if you can, grabbing a socket wrench and or a flathead screwdriver. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But your first step that you want to get done after you've laid everything out is go to the end and take off this rubber cap. It's pretty straightforward. Just pop it right off, lay it aside. After that, you're going to find one of your bolts and you're going to slot it right into the channel, just like that. Do the same thing for the second one. Next, grab your bracket and you're going to line up those bolts with those two holes there. Now remember, figure out where the zipper is, because that's going to determine somewhat of how you want to mount it, or at least be aware of it in the future when you do go to mount it. So for my purposes, I'm going to line this guy up just like this. I'm going to grab one of the nuts and I'm going to secure that gently on there. Now this is where a ratchet can come in handy, or you can just use the end of it to kind of help screw it on there a little bit easier. Now, when you do this, make sure you don't get it on there super tight. You still want to be able to slide this around, because in the end, you're going to be trying to fit this with your roof rack. Do that for the other side, and now you're ready to look at getting it mounted. Now that you have your brackets attached to your awning, the easiest way to do, I have found, is to kind of figure out your spacing by just simply putting this up there, kind of eyeballing where the brackets fit so that they will go onto your rack. Now there's a number of different car racks out there. There's a number of different options and ways to do this. In this setup that I have right here, you've got a aftermarket car roof rack system that has a channel in it that I can use to slot a screw just like I did for the awning and tighten it down that way. Simply, it's going to connect into these bolts right here, and then I use a washer just because I like to have a washer for that, just extra security. But one of the things to take note of when you're mounting some of this stuff is that every roof rack is a little bit different. So while you're supplied with hardware, in the end you may have to adjust either a step up, step down, something like that. You may have to get some additional hardware for it to actually mount to your vehicle, because there's a lot of different options. So in this option, for instance, I had to step down to get a couple different bits and pieces to make this work. And the other thing that's really nice if you've got a track system is you have a lot more adjustability. You can pull this in or out depending on how it's going to fit on your rack. So it is something to just be aware of and something to tinker with. So again, when you're thinking about, I've got either a Prinsu rack, for instance, that has a slot in there, you're going to use carriage bolts. So being aware of some of that stuff, that there are some bits and pieces that you're going to likely have to get. It just kind of comes with the territory because there are a lot of different options. So for this setup, for instance, if I have that T-channel, that's what I'm going to do. And it's going to bolt on there and it's not going anywhere. The second option is if this didn't have a T-slot, or if it is factory crossbars, for instance, then you're going to have to figure out another way to kind of mount that system to where you're at. And I've got something right here. So this is what I've used right here, just a U-bolt. And this is going to clamp to the bolt and the mount, and it's going to hold it there. Now when I did it, I definitely used 2 and maybe even 3 depending on just my own preference and what I wanted to make sure it wasn't going anywhere. But in this system, again, it's compressing the pieces together and it's not going anywhere. I have this specific setup on this exact mount on my 4Runner using the factory bars for 2 years and it didn't go anywhere. So I know this works. So you can pick some of this stuff up at the hardware store. One thing to be aware of is when you do mount this, make sure you're aware of, again, how long of a bolt this is, because the last thing you want to do is when you mount this, you don't want it to touch or even rub your roof. So be aware of that is an option. Beyond that, you've got your setup ready to go. Okay, so now that we've talked about general mounting, you can kind of see what this might look like if I have this system set up here. Now, one of the things you do need to be aware of is depending on where this actually clamps on, you're going to have to move things and adjust things. So depending on how you have it set up, this may move a little bit here or there, or you're going to have to kind of get creative with how I actually strap this down. And some people, from what I've seen, have gotten really creative and created custom crossbars and all kinds of different things that they just, again, it works for what they're doing. And that's, I think, the fun part about this process is figuring out what works for you. So once this is all set up and mounted, you can kind of figure out how far can I go away from the car? Do I have to kind of adjust or even tip the awning in order to fit properly? I have this exact setup on my 4Runner. I also have this exact same setup moved onto my 2016 Honda Odyssey, and it works great. It sets up really nicely. But the challenge I ran into when I was looking at it, both the look and also just how it all fit together, was I had to kind of adapt it at an angle just because of the fit of the vehicle. So one side maybe came out a little bit farther, which means I kind of had to adjust a little bit here and play with it to make it work. But in the end, the key is it set? Is it anchored properly? Is it secured? And once you get this all kind of figured out, going back through and really tightening down, but make sure not to over tighten all your different nuts and bolts and everything else that's going on, just because you want to make it secure. Now, one thing to note, and we talked about you might need a flathead, for instance, is if you get underneath this, for instance, you can kind of prop and secure the bolt a little bit, and that'll help you get under it so you can kind of tighten it a little bit better, because sometimes these just want to spin or they're struggling a little bit. So if you can put a little bit of upward pressure as you're tightening, those nut and that screw will continue to kind of close down a little bit to feel that pressure and really lock it down. So there's a lot of different options when you're thinking about how do I mount an awning, how do I mount either our shower awning or the car awning that we're doing right now. But also, again, remember, where's the zipper? The zipper on this is on the bottom, so it's going to come from one end, zip all the way down, and then go from there. So be aware when you're mounting this, where's the zipper? How is this all going to work together? Because you want this to open up and then unfold the awning there. So that's what we got. Hopefully it's a simple process for you, and we can get out there and having fun, exploring, and get you doing some kick-ass stuff.